Our morbidly obese federal government needs not just behavior modification, but bariatric surgery.
That was Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels at this year's Conservative Political Action Conference. He's a man of strong views on the American economy, and he joins me now. Governor, thank you for joining me. Keeping the Republic, saving America by trusting Americans. With a little thing here, America's best governor, says a man from the New York Times. So, come on.
You'd have to take that up with him. I don't know what made him say that.
How are you going to keep the Republic?
I hope we're going to do it by, first of all, placing the future ahead of the present, which is to say, matching long-term means with ends. We're badly out of whack, as we all know. We have huge debts today, like so many other developed countries. And worse still, we've made unfundable commitments for tomorrow. So it has to start with that. We have to commit the nation to the growth of the private sector. You know, what's troubling me most, Piers, is that it's not just our economy at stake. I think it's the whole American prospect, the American promise of upward mobility for all. And I go so far as to suggest, really, that the whole project of government by consent of the governed is on trial here, as many philosophers through time always predicted it would be.
I mean, what your critics say, I mean, you were known as these fantastic nicknames, Mitch the Knife and the Blade, when you worked for President Bush, because you were so aggressive with spending cuts. But they also say, look, this is the guy that brought in the Bush tax cuts, and that has been partly responsible, along with going into wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, for the financial mess the country's got itself into. So, far from being the one who keeps the Republic, you're the one that stuck the Republic in the mire. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's a little overstated. You know, maybe it's a testimony those years to my poor powers of persuasion. I was always arguing with a Republican Congress. It's fair to say it wasn't the Democratic Party in charge those days. I gave speeches at the National Press Club and other places, pointed out that in past conflicts, America, Harry Truman at the time of Korea is a great example, had really reduced spending, at least temporarily, on other things. And that's what you do if you take on new obligations or wars. Didn't get very far with that. We did have guns and butter, and that was a part of it. But you know,
I've seen you say today that it's only a tiny part of it and shouldn't really be considered. I mean, it was $1 trillion. I mean, it's not a tiny part of a budget. Is it $1 trillion on wars?
Well, it doesn't sound as big as it used to now that we're running $1.4 trillion every year. I mean, the biggest deficit under George Bush was 1/3 the size of the ones we're running today. You know, I'm not here to argue or defend anything that happened back then. If you want to know what I really think about spending, you probably better to look at the 7 years I've actually been in charge of something.
Well, your record in Indiana is very good. I mean, you got re-elected there, and it's coming to an end, I know, in 2012, and it is very good in many, many areas, no question. Yeah. But what I would put to you, I'd say that even someone like you who's got a great fiscal record in your state, you still struggle with unemployment. It's up to 8.2%. Yeah. National average is 9.2%, so you're a little below that. But it's rising, and you're clearly, despite having all the answers, having similar problems to the president.
First, let me say, I try to be very explicit in this book that I don't claim to have all the answers. I take the
Some of the answers?
I take the responsibility for offering what I think are the best answers, but I say many times that this situation, I believe, is so urgent that no one can afford to be totally doctrinaire. And I say in there that if it comes to the second or third best set of answers as opposed to inaction and the disaster that would bring, then you can count me in for one.
How much of President Obama's problem is down to the Republican 8 years running the White House? In other words, the financial crisis, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, tax cuts and so on. How much of what he inherited, percentage-wise, is to blame for the current malaise? And be fair-minded about it.
Oh, some percentage. You know, the biggest problems by far...
Well, where would you put it?
Statistically, if you were to repeal the tax cuts, you'd solve less than 10% of the problem we have today. So
you wouldn't honestly look me in the eye and say that only 10% of the financial problems America has today are down to the Republicans, would you?
Well, that's a different question, because, listen, the problems that we're really facing, the ones that are, I think ought to absorb our attention, are far bigger than any 1 year's deficit. The previous ones, even the enormous ones, the unprecedented ones, we're running right this minute. The unfunded liabilities we have stacked up for ourselves, compounded by debts at the state and local level, not to mention private debt, is an enormous overhang on the American future. And a major theme of what I've tried to say in this book is that whatever got us into this, to debate it endlessly now is a waste of precious time. I believe a clock is ticking, and that the need for change, big change, is urgent. We need to reform the safety net programs, not for those in them now, but for the future. We need a pro-growth tax plan, tax reform. We ought to be wholeheartedly supportive of domestic energy production in every form, absolutely every form.
Well, one of the main themes of the book is also it's civilized. You're not ripping into your opponents.
I sure try not to.
But here's my big problem with what's going on with some of the Republicans, and it's a big problem that many Americans feel, is that up in Washington, they made it absolutely clear, some of them on the record, we want Barack Obama to be a one-term president. And they're doing everything they can to do him in. And they're being as intransigent as they can. They're causing huge rows over the debt ceiling when there shouldn't have been any, and everyone knew that. And there's a real disconnect between what's going on there and what the public want, which is just sort the mess out, you lot, together. Now, you seem much more unifying in your tone in this book than many of your colleagues in the party. What is your message to them as they continue to tear into Obama and make it all very partisan?
Yes, well, I have found, we have found in our state, and I had to learn this the hard way, honestly, that if you're interested in results, then you must always strive to bring people together. Big change requires big majorities, and we need big change to avoid becoming the Greece of the future. So, yes, I do.
Barack Obama has tried to do that. That's exactly what he said when he came in. He wanted to be inclusive.
Oh, he has said it, but
he wanted to work with the opposition, but when he's tried, the Republicans have stamped on his head.
Piers, you've joined us fairly recently, and maybe you missed a few twists and turns in the road. He ran over, with the help of big majorities. I mean, they were entitled to. They won the election. But he had his way completely for 2 years, ignored reservations that Republicans had. And, you know, my gosh, what a divisive speech he gave this week.
You can't blame him, can you?
Well, let me just say.
Having been trashed all summer, he's finally come out and went, well okay, this is the way you're going to play it. I'm going to get dirty too. I mean, you can't blame him.
He gives as good as he gets. I mentioned in the book, he's a self-avowed acolyte of Saul Alinsky, who started his advice, you know, to radicals with personalize and condemn your opposition.
Hold that thought for a moment. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to continue this and hear how you're going to beat Barack Obama in the next election. Maybe not you personally, or maybe it will be you personally. Who knows?
Don't lose your right to